The future of the Zelda series is something I find very interesting. There are so many ports and remasters. We're expecting full remakes of older games, but also what could we get in the future in terms of new games? So today I wanted to dive deeper into that topic. I'm joined by my friend Caleb, who also has a YouTube channel. I'll have his channel linked down below. Let's get into it. All right, Caleb, thanks for joining me. So today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the future of the Zelda franchise. I like doing these every couple of months or every like half a year, just to kind of see where the state of things is. I think the last time I did this was before Tears of the Kingdom, and while not a lot has changed, there are some interesting developments that I think do indicate what the next Zelda projects could be. So we have a couple things listed here we want to talk about. It's kind of weird. Like, I want to go in order of like what we think will happen, but also there is one very important wrench that I think could completely change all of this, and that is Grezzo, which we'll talk about. But I guess we'll start with Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, because I made that video a couple days ago talking about the Amiibo restock, about how there might be a shadow drop in the upcoming Nintendo Direct. So we'll start with Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. Now, I've been kind of hesitant to believe this. In my opinion, if this was going to happen, I thought for sure it would have happened in 2022, after Tears of the Kingdom got delayed, because there was no Zelda game that year. And after that, I'm just like, well, the Switch 2 is probably coming out, in the next year or so. I don't know if they really want to use these last couple of remasters they already have made. I feel like they should spread these out a little bit more, but maybe it's been long enough. Maybe they are spreading them out now. So what do you think of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess coming out potentially this year? I mean, even maybe next week on the Switch.
I think that, for the entire Switch generation, I was just assuming they would come over up until like 2021. Then I just kind of gave up because it had been so long. After Tears of the Kingdom came out, I'm just like, okay, well, they gotta have release a Zelda game. So I feel like now they're kind of inevitable for Switch 1. I don't know if it would come out this year. I do think they'll shadow drop something, and it could be Zelda based on the Amiibo restocks. But I also think that they would put Metroid in there somewhere, and I don't know where else they would put it. But I think Zelda's coming out either way.
I do think Metroid is very interesting when it comes to what could be announced in the Direct next week, or if we do get a Direct next week, we're assuming we will. As much as I love Wind Waker, and as much as I would like to play Twilight Princess and actually finish it for the first time, I would definitely prefer Prime 2 and 3, just because I feel like it's kind of double-sided. From a business standpoint, the Zelda games will obviously sell better, there's no question. But from a marketing standpoint, if Prime 4 is coming out this year, or even early next, if it gets pushed, I mean, well, I say get pushed, we don't know it's coming out this year. I feel like releasing Prime 2 and 3 first makes more sense. And I also feel like, while I definitely think it's possible Wind Waker or Twilight Princess gets shadow drop, maybe not together, but it doesn't really matter. Together, separate, it doesn't matter. I feel like, though, that would be the biggest shadow drop they've ever done. Even though Metroid Prime Remastered was like a bigger deal because it was like a new remaster, Zelda games sell millions of copies. So I feel like that would be a pretty major game to shadow drop.
Yeah, I was under the impression that they would announce a date for it. I never thought it would be shadow dropped until you mentioned it recently, because I would just assume it would be the same as any other Wii U port, like how they would plan them out in advance. But shadow dropping it, that would be the biggest thing they've ever shadow dropped, arguably.
Yeah, definitely in terms of sales. It's maybe not as exciting necessarily as Metroid Prime Remastered, but so are we both in agreement that this is probably happening this year, Wind Waker and Twilight Princess?
I think at the very least, if it doesn't happen this year, it's definitely going to happen next year.
Okay. Well, in that case, we do need to talk about what would come out this year, because, I mean, this goes back to what Reggie said, like, almost a decade ago at this point, that they like to have a Zelda game every year on store shelves. And with the exception of 2022, which we know is when Tears of the Kingdom was originally slated for, that's been true. If you count Hyrule Warriors and then Legends and then Definitive Edition as separate things, if you count Cadence of Hyrule, there's usually at least one, sometimes two Zelda games each calendar year. And I did a predictions video a couple weeks back predicting every single first-party game on Switch this year. And I had put a 2D remake of Four Swords Adventures in November, developed by Grezzo. I feel like 2D Zelda is the next main talking point here, because it's been so long since Link's Awakening. It's been even longer since the last truly new one, be it Triforce Heroes or A Link Between Worlds, if you count Triforce Heroes as a spinoff. I just feel like it's time. But also, here's the... it's so hard to speculate, because if the Switch 2 comes out this year, that does change things, right? And then with 2D Zelda, of course, the past couple have been made by Grezzo. They did, well, historically, they did Ocarina of Time remake, or sorry, Ocarina of Time 3D and Majora's Mask 3D. They did Triforce Heroes, and they did A Link's Awakening, the remake on Switch. Since then, they've done Miitopia, and that was their last major project, as well as an Apple Arcade game, I believe. We don't know if they're doing Luigi's Mansion 2 HD, and I feel like whether or not that is the case completely changes the landscape in terms of the next 2D Zelda game. If they are doing Luigi's Mansion 2 and it's not being done eternally at Next Level, which frankly I do think is likely, I do think, considering their lineage, they did Luigi's Mansion on 3DS, they did Miitopia, which was a 3DS game on Switch, I think it makes sense that they would do Luigi's Mansion 2 HD. If that's the only project they have, I mean, they're not a huge studio, I think they have like 80 employees, and as I mentioned, they did the Apple Arcade game. I don't think... I want a 2D Zelda game so bad, and it definitely feels like we're overdue, but if they're doing Luigi's Mansion, I don't know, man.
I think it also has to do with Next Level themselves, because I'm not saying Next Level is maybe making Luigi's Mansion 2. It's possible, but I think it also depends if they're also making the Peach game or not. Because if they're not making the Peach game, then they'll probably do Luigi's Mansion 2. However, I do think it's more likely that Grozzo's doing Luigi's Mansion 2, because, like you said, Miitopia, and I feel like if they have the resources to remaster a 3DS game, it would be a waste to only do it once.
Yeah, I mean, there was a while there I was hypothesizing that maybe Grezzo would be lead developer on either a remake or a port or whatever, a new game of Tomodachi Life, since they had that Miitopia history. And that could still be. I mean, I'm still expecting a Tomodachi Life game this year. Yeah, the next 2D Zelda game is interesting because, I mean, it has to happen before the next 3D game, I feel like. And like I said, maybe it's a remake. I don't think anybody's ever uttered the words Four Swords Adventures remake on YouTube until I said it. To be honest, no one's ever really talked about that. But when we're talking about the Switch's final year, we're getting a lot of remakes and remasters and ports. I feel like, and especially in the case of a multiplayer Zelda game on Switch, I mean, we've been talking about that since before Link's Awakening came out in 2019. That would make a lot of sense. It'd be pretty low effort. They wouldn't need to do much. I think you've talked about maybe they put Four Swords from GBA on Switch Online. Maybe they even do some sort of Four Swords Adventures, like, smaller, like, scale thing, but maybe it's, like, kind of a new thing, like they did with Four Swords Anniversary on DSi. Maybe they do a similar thing for Four Swords Adventures, where it's not necessarily, like, a $60 game. But what do you think of that? Do you think it's... Okay, let's assume Grezzo is doing a 2D Zelda game and not Luigi's Mansion. Do you think it's likelier they're making a new single-player game, a new co-op game, or a remake of Four Swords, or Four Swords, the original version, Adventures?
Well, first of all, I think Four Swords is kind of inevitable on Switch Online, because they need something to sort of push the service a little bit, and Four Swords is perfect because, of course, the Switch Online app has online play for these old games, and you saw the same thing happen with GoldenEye. They promoted that online play for that game specifically, and that's just a Switch Online game, and Four Swords fits perfectly for that, because this game has never had online before. It was on the DSi, and it was on the 3DS via DSiWare, but it was only local play, and I feel like it would be perfect if they just put this game with online play on Switch Online. However, I would say that if they're doing that, it makes it less likely that they'll do Four Swords Adventures, because of course you could argue that maybe, you know, that GBA game will sort of support Four Swords Adventures in like a marketing kind of way, but at the same time, if there's a free Four Swords game, arguably free because it's included, then less people would be inclined to buy the one that you actually have to pay for. So I don't know if they're going to do both. I feel like it's more likely that they'll do just like a single-player game instead of Four Swords Adventures.
Well, I mean, that's actually an interesting point. So we're currently about to run out of currently announced GBA games. I think the last one we haven't gotten is F-Zero Maximum Velocity. And we have seen a pattern, or a trend, if you want to call it that, where if a game is getting remade, it doesn't really normally get added to Switch Online unless it's after the fact. Like Link's Awakening got remade in 2019, and then years later we got it through Switch Online with the Game Boy Color version. We have seen Nintendo not putting ROMs on Switch Online if that game is getting a remake, most notably with Mario RPG and with Mario vs. Donkey Kong. And I feel like, was there another one?
I'm not sure.
Well, either way, I mean, that's two pretty important games that, I mean, they've had SNES games on Switch Online for years now, and Mario RPG should have been there, but it wasn't, and then it got remade. Mario vs. Donkey Kong was part of the 3DS Ambassador program, and I feel like they kind of consider that one of like the 10 GBA games, and that wasn't part of the Switch Online launch for GBA last year, because they knew it was getting remade. Oh, Advance Wars. That's the other one. That never came. Although that was announced beforehand, to be fair. So maybe the reason we haven't seen Four Swords on Switch Online yet is because they know they're either remaking that in some sort of like new online release, like the Anniversary Edition on DSi, or because, like you said, if there's a free game, maybe they want to be able to sell Four Swords Adventures. Maybe that's why. Maybe that's why they haven't added it, because they are doing Four Swords Adventures. That's interesting. Because that does feel like one of the games that would have been like an easy push when they added GBA, because it's so multiplayer focused.
That's true, but also I think GBA existing in itself would be enough to sell it. And I think that if they want to re-push the service again, they'd want to do something a little bit more interesting, which is why I think they probably delayed Four Swords. Like I said, I think it's more likely they're getting Four Swords GBA instead of Four Swords Adventures or another like multiplayer Zelda.
Well, there is one other elephant in the room we need to address, and that is the fabled Ocarina of Time remake. Now, this is something for new viewers of this channel. Me and Caleb here, we had a YouTube channel called Game Trope years ago, and we actually made a video talking about the future of Zelda at that point in 2021, or maybe even I think it was like late 2020, something like that. And I think that was the first point where one of us mentioned Ocarina of Time remake, and ever since I've been kind of convinced it makes sense for that to happen next after Tears of the Kingdom came out. In terms of like the mainline 3D games, this I feel like is a certainty. This is based on nothing but just a logical conclusion. You know, there's no rumors about this. There's nothing really suggesting it. There was that Game Informer. I think it was Game Informer. There was an interview with Aonuma a couple of months ago where they were asked about potential Ocarina of Time remake, and Aonuma said no comment, which is kind of suspect.
There was also, he did mention the fact that Rauru as a character in Ocarina of Time, because obviously there's a character named Rauru in Tears of the Kingdom, and he basically mentioned that people just think that's a new character when his name is obviously based on the Ocarina of Time character, but he's saying that it seems like a bit weird that nobody knows the original character now. The fact that he even mentioned the existence of Ocarina of Time character in reference to that game just seems kind of odd.
Yeah, and we know from interviews that Tears of the Kingdom was content complete in 2022, and they were polishing it up for the remainder of that time, so I don't think it's unreasonable to think that the developer is weird, right? I want to say that the leading developer for Ocarina of Time remake would probably be Nintendo EPD3. That's the Zelda team that did Tears of the Kingdom, with maybe support from Tantalus. They did Skyward Sword HD and Twilight Princess HD. This could be something like Grezzo's doing if 2D Zelda is just kind of being put on the back burner for way longer than it probably should be. It could be something, I think you've posited the idea that, well, of course, since Monolith Soft helps with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, they would probably help with Ocarina of Time remake. But I think the context of Ocarina of Time remake, like, it's gonna happen. If we've already gone through all the major 3D Zeldas, we kind of have to restart, and Ocarina of Time is the fan favorite, outside of Breath of the Wild, of course, now with the new generation. So I don't think it's a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And a lot of people think that this game would launch in the first 12 or maybe even 18 months of the Switch 2. I think you've talked to me about how you think that's a little bit too soon before, but since we know that Tears of the Kingdom was complete in 2022, or essentially complete, I don't know. Both of us are working under the assumption, of course, that the Switch 2 is releasing in March of next year, although that's only like a 6 months difference. It doesn't really matter. I don't know if it's impossible. I mean, that would be 3 years after Tears of the Kingdom was content complete for a remake of Ocarina of Time. Do you think that's too soon?
I think it's probably more likely 2026 than 2025. But there is one thing to note, and I'm sure someone will bring this up, because they've already remade or remastered all the 3D Zelda games, right? Up to Skyward Sword, and I don't think they're going to do Breath of the Wild. I think that's a whole different thing. But regardless, but I know some of them might argue, well, they did Link's Awakening, so now they're just going to do the handheld games. Which is, you could say that, but at the same time, A Link Between Worlds was originally going to be a remake of A Link to the Past. So if you're going to remake the 2D games, they kind of already started that and were working on it simultaneously as the 3D games. So it's not like they're doing the 2D games after. It's just they were simultaneous because, like I said, Link Between Worlds was originally supposed to be a remake, and then they did Link's Awakening after that. So I would argue Ocarina of Time makes sense next, but then after that, they could do like the Oracle games or like Minish Cap or something.
Yeah, I do think the days of EPD3, that core Zelda team, I think those days of them working on 2D Zelda is definitely past. Maybe in some sort of supporting role. Which is why I hope Grezzo's not doing Luigi's Mansion 2, because otherwise I don't know who would do 2D Zelda again. Now, you did actually mention something interesting there. You mentioned Breath of the Wild. Something that people haven't really talked about is potential Switch ports to Switch 2. I know some people think there will be like free upgrades or something. Nintendo doesn't really have a history of doing that. Do you think we could get like a I mean, they were reportedly at Gamescom they were showing Breath of the Wild running at 4K 60 on the Switch 2 dev units. Whether or not that's true or not remains to be seen. But do you think they could just sell Breath of the Wild again in the first year of the Switch? Because I feel like they are going to want some sort of Zelda game with the Switch 2 box art on store shelves. Like, as part of the Switch 2 reveal, I feel like Zelda needs to be a part of that. And if Ocarina of Time Remake isn't coming until later, maybe Breath of the Wild could be that. Or Tears of the Kingdom Complete Edition.
Yeah, you mentioned the fact that Nintendo doesn't really have a precedent of offering upgrades for their games, which is basically true, but neither did PlayStation or Xbox up until the 9th gen consoles came out.
No, there was upgrades on PS4 from PS3.
Was there?
Yeah, there actually was. It was paid upgrades, and it was very, like, Sony themselves never did it, I don't think, but, like, Call of Duty Ghosts, you could pay $10 to upgrade.
Okay, well, we're talking about first party. but anyway, the point is, I don't think there's going to be an upgrade for Breath of the Wild. I think it's more likely that they just remaster it or port it or whatever. Obviously, with all the DLC included, I would think. And I also think they'll probably do Tears of the Kingdom as well if they're going to do Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, Tears of the Kingdom, I think, is more interesting because that game didn't get DLC, and more importantly, there is still no Master Mode. Aonuma has said they are not working on DLC. That could be a coy way of them just being like, well, we're making more content for it, but it's not DLC for the Switch version. Because that is, out of all of the games released last year that haven't gotten DLC, people talk about Pikmin 4, Mario Wonder. We could see those in a direct upcoming. If Tears of the Kingdom was getting DLC, it probably would have been announced either beforehand or in the September Direct or even in the June Direct last year. So I think it's safe to say, and based on Aonuma's comments, taking him at face value, it's definitely not getting DLC on the Switch. And that's just really weird because it's one of the best-selling Switch games, and almost all of the best-selling Switch games have had paid DLC. So that is definitely suspect.
Yeah, I mean, it would also arguably be a good idea to just hold off on the new content until they release a port, because you'd want something new with the new version of the game, right? Plus, a lot of people bought Tears of the Kingdom, and I think if they just ported the game just the way it is, without adding anything new, there wouldn't be very many people who buy it. Because the upgrade from Switch 1 to Switch 2, I can't imagine would be that drastic. Maybe 60 FPS, if we're optimistic, but that's probably it.
Yeah, we are thinking in a very anti-consumer way. It'd be nice if they did free upgrades for Switch 1 games, and, you know, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom get a 60 FPS patch. I don't think that would happen. I think they would sell it again. I think there's a select handful of games that Nintendo thinks they can probably sell again, especially if they include Breath of the Wild's, you know, expansion pass with it. Just to have it kind of refreshed for the next generation. Tears of the Kingdom, and something like Mario Wonder even, if that game gets DLC, maybe not. Those are games that are kind of going to have their legs cut off by a new console releasing, but also being Switch 1 games. When those are, like, Mario Wonder's a game that would sell for 10 years if it's on store shelves.
Yeah. I also think that they might do... Now, of course, people have thrown the idea of Nintendo Selects, but I think the idea of Nintendo Selects, I used to think that it was just for a price cut, but I think it makes more sense now if they just release them, of course, with perhaps a price cut, but also the main thing being saying, you know, these are the Nintendo, the best games on Switch. You can play them on your Switch too. I think that makes more sense than just having them for the sake of a price cut.
Yeah. A new sticker on the box.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then beyond Ocarina of Time Remake, beyond these potential Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom ports, we will get another 3D Zelda game. I think it will still probably not be necessarily what these hardcore Zelda fans want in terms of linear design. I don't think they're ever going to go back to a linear design Zelda, but I don't think it's going to be like Breath of the Wild 3. I'm pretty sure Aonuma has said as much that they're done with that Hyrule.
Yeah, I think it's more likely they'll do a completely new setting. Even if I think it's more likely they just do like a completely different kingdom. However, if they want to stick with Hyrule, they'll have to like change something drastically. They'll have to like make towns or some. They have to make it settled. They have to add towns and people and different things.
I thought for a second you were gonna say they have to make it good.
Yeah, well, that would be hopeful, you know. But I mean, maybe we'll finally get the future Zelda. The Zelda game takes place in like
The futuristic Zelda game? Yeah.
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 I mean, that'd be cool. I've been wanting that forever. But
Yeah, I think let's hold off on this 3D Zelda. Like, I mean, this would be like 2029 at this point. Let's hold off on that because I think that's a separate entire discussion of what they could do to evolve the series moving forward. So, just to recap, we both think that Wind Waker and Twilight Princess is pretty likely this year, or maybe early next year or something. 2D Zelda depends entirely on what Grezzo's doing. I really hope they're not doing Luigi's Mansion 2, like as I've said over and over again, because that would suck if that's all they've been working on.
I mean, I still think 2D Zelda would come. It would just be later.
Yeah, it would just be later after. I mean, Grezzo, once again, smaller team. They seem to work on like a 2 to 3 year dev cycle. So if they start a 2D Zelda game, let's say Luigi's Mansion 2 is probably done. Maybe it was even done late last year or something. They're probably already working on that if that's the case. So it would come out probably maybe 2 years into the Switch 2's life cycle, which wouldn't be too bad, I guess. But I feel like we're already overdue. And then, of course, the major thing being Ocarina of Time remake. I mean, I think most people are expecting that at this point. It just makes too much sense. That's too much money for Nintendo to leave on the table. Did we forget anything here, Caleb, before we end off?
I mean, that's basically it. Of course, if you want to count the Breath of the Wild ports, there's not really much else they can do. But as far as the future of Zelda, there's not really like a lot to really include unless you count like they're gonna make Link's Crossbow Training 2, but I don't really think they're doing that.
Imagine the Switch 2 reveal and they just re-show the Wii U tech demo for Zelda, but it's actually a game this time.
Impossible.
Oh, and I guess as we close out here, there's something else we should mention. That is the possibility of another Hyrule Warriors game. So I personally would hope for a Hyrule Warriors 2 that is more of like a fan service game from all aspects of the series, but it is possible that we get the more modern Warriors approach that focuses on one game. We saw this, of course, with Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, and then we saw it with Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes. Those are focused on like specific games. It is possible we get either Hyrule Warriors 2 or a Hyrule Warriors Tears of the Kingdom, probably titled Hyrule Warriors Imprisoning War. I hope that doesn't happen so soon. I'd prefer Xenoblade Warriors. That's what I've been predicting and hoping for. I feel like Age of Calamity was kind of a disappointment for me personally. I much preferred the original Hyrule Warriors, but that's definitely something that's possible. Not mainline, but I figured I should mention that here as well before we end off. All right, Caleb, well, thank you so much for joining me. You have a YouTube channel that you've been uploading to. Can you tell people where they can find you here?
Yes, so my YouTube channel is called Caleb Bravo. It's literally just my name. But I do upload occasionally when I feel like it. Recently, we're talking about the Direct, so that'd be nice to talk about. But of course, more content I planned. I did recently move, so I hadn't been uploading for a while, but I should be starting up again. So that's basically kind of expect some stuff to happen there.
Yeah, go check out his predictions video, guys. He just posted one yesterday when this is going up, so definitely go give that a watch. I'll link it down below. And of course, subscribe here for more Nintendo Switch news, coverage, all of that stuff. Follow me on Twitter at Botox Games. Follow Caleb on Twitter at Caleb_Bravo99. And until next time, peace.